This is the Voices of Titanic podcast, episode 10, and I'm your host, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to give a special thanks to my brother for sending me an article about this passenger. As always, it's a sad journey, but this time it's a journey filled with the struggle of addiction. And similar to last week's episode, this individual survived the sinking, but may have been so severely traumatized by the experience that it possibly contributed to his death later on. There has been a recent update, however, to this man's story this year, and it is very uplifting and heartwarming, and I'd like to share it with you all. In today's episode, we are talking about Alan Marden Baggott. Alan was born on April 13th, 1884 in Stepney, England, to parents William and Susan Lake Baggott. Stepney is located between the Thames River and Mile End Road. It started in a medieval village called Stevenheda. Mile End Road and the local docks helped the town expand in the 16th and 17th centuries. It would later develop into a parish, which split up into many smaller parishes. Stepney was unfortunately severely damaged during World War II and required large-scale redevelopment. Today, the town is a working-class immigrant neighborhood. Alan was baptized on June 12, 1884 at St. Thomas in Stepney. In 1891, his family lived in Mile End Old Town. Alan lived with his parents and two older sisters, Elizabeth and Helena. Alan is missing from the 1901 census, and I'm not sure why, but I'm guessing at 16 he was no longer living at home. In the fall of 1905, Alan married Hannah Buck from Sunderland, England. They had a daughter, Nancy Aline, born around the same year, a son, Robert Allen, born April 25, 1906, a son, William Marden, born in 1907, another daughter, Irene, born in 1910, and a son, George, born in 1911. Alan Baggott is not shown on the 1911 census, but the family is living at 38 St. Mary's Place in Southampton. I'm guessing that he was not present when the census was recorded due to his work on ships. Before signing on to the Titanic, he worked on the RMS Oceanic, another White Star liner. At 27 years old, on April 4, 1912, Alan signed on to the Titanic as a first-class steward. He listed his address as 106 Park Road in Southampton. His wages were £3, 15 shillings a month, and he was to board the ship on the 10th at 6 a.m. for her maiden voyage. There are no records of his time on Titanic, but we do know that Alan was rescued in boat number 9. Alongside him were 26 passengers and 5 members of the crew. 6 passengers were from first class, 17 were second class, and 3 were from third class. After surviving the sinking of the Titanic, Alan returned to working on ships. He and his wife had 2 more children, Bessie, born in 1913, and Fred, born in approximately 1915. On November 25, 1919, Alan signed on to the York Castle, a ship built in 1901 by Sir James Lang and Sons. The number of his passport or document used was 854413. He was listed as a chief steward and stood at 5 feet 11 inches, weighing 11 stone 4 pounds. I had to look up what this equals, but it is equivalent to about 158 pounds. He had no physical marks or peculiarities, and unfortunately, I could not make out what his address was at the time. Next, we see Alan working on the HMS Perthshire, again as a chief steward. Compared to a steward, a chief steward was a senior crew member focused on staff and operations. The Perthshire was part of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, providing logistical support for Britain's Royal Navy. The ship carried fuel, provisions, ammunition, and replacement parts to warships in the Mediterranean. Its normal berth was Grand Harbour in Malta, a location considered to be the logistical heart of British naval operations. The fleet supply ship was built in 1893 and was originally built for Australian immigrants in the meat trade. Sadly, this is when documentation clearly begins to show a pattern that Alan was struggling with alcohol abuse. There are numerous instances of him appearing in the ship's log for his drunkenness. When in Constantinople in early 1920, he was found drunk and had thrown his clothing over the side of the ship. He was ordered to stay in his room under guard to prevent suicide, and the whiskey discovered in his room was confiscated. Around the same time, in January of 1920, he had a struggle with a guard and had caused damage to his cabin. The day after this incident, he was examined by a Royal Navy surgeon lieutenant from the HMS Iron Duke. He was then removed from the ship and placed in a naval hospital. On February 11th, he returned from the hospital and resumed his duties the next day. He was said to be suffering from delirium tremens. Delirium tremens is a severe form of alcohol withdrawal and includes extreme mental or nervous system changes. Symptoms can occur when you stop drinking alcohol after a period of heavy drinking, and it can be exacerbated by not eating enough food. It's common for people who have a history of alcohol withdrawal and those who have abused alcohol for more than 10 years. I'm not sure why he was returned to work so shortly afterward and while he was suffering from delirium tremens. These symptoms are wide-ranging. It's everything from body tremors, hallucinations, mood changes, seizures, sweating, and chest pain. There are many more symptoms listed if you look it up, and they are all awful and sound absolutely miserable, and I can't imagine that he was having an easy time. In November of that same year, Alan showed up at the British naval base at Constantinople while under the influence. The captain of the naval base ordered that he be detained on the HMS Helicopter. After only 3 days of detention, he returned to the Perthshire. The ship left Constantinople and arrived in Malta on December 1st, 1920. 2 months later, on February 12th, 1921, Alan suddenly fell ill and suffered a seizure in Grand Harbor, Malta. A doctor, Surgeon Lieutenant William A. Jolliffe from the HMS Emperor of India was called for aid. The doctor's recommendation was to take Alan ashore to the Big Key Naval Hospital. While Alan and the surgeon were en route to the hospital, he sadly passed away. He was only 36 years old. His cause of death was ruled as, quote, heart failure following alcoholism. On February 21st, Alan was buried in Tabraxia Cemetery in the town of Pieta in an unmarked grave said to be in a grassy corner of the cemetery. This is a common burial ground for British servicemen and their families, and for decades he had no headstone. I'm unsure of why his family didn't have one placed for him. In April of that year, Alan's widow Hannah was living alone with the children at 31 Clifton Road in London with her children Robert, William, Irene, George, Bessie, and Fred. I could not find Nancy on any other records. I am assuming she passed away, but I could be wrong. Hannah died at only 54 in 1938 in Essex. I couldn't find anything about her life after Alan's death. And sadly, there's very little to go on for Alan and Hannah's children as well. Their son Robert was documented as still living at Clifton Road in 1939 and worked as an electric werewear. He passed away in May of 1994 at 88 years old. Son William served in the British Royal Navy. He was described as being over 6 feet tall with light hair and blue eyes. He had a scar on his right leg, but no other remarkable features. He served from 1925 to 1930. He worked on ships such as the Ballinrald as a, quote, ordinary seaman, the Trojan Star, the Arendora, this time listed as a sailor, the Stuart Star, the Minnesota as an able-bodied seaman, and the Fordsdale. So he had quite a naval career. His time in the Navy brought him all over to places like Vancouver, Seattle, New York, and Australia. William passed away in Essex at the age of 61 in 1968. He was buried at Corringham Cemetery. I do not know if he married or had children. Daughter Irene Baggott immigrated to the United States in 1930 at 20 years old. She took Cunard's beautiful Mauritania from Southampton to New York on August 23rd and arrived on August 30th. She was described as being 5'7" with brown hair and brown eyes. Irene was a single waitress traveling to stay in the U.S. permanently. It says her relationship in the U.S. was with a cousin named Mrs. Vincent. On July 8, 1936, Irene married Frederick G. Wolfe of New York and White Plains, also in New York. In 1938, the couple had a daughter named Sharon May. In 1940, they lived at 175 Grand Avenue in White Plains. Frederick worked as a chauffeur while Irene took care of the home and their daughter. They had another child, a son Marden, named after her father, born in 1941. In 1950, they were living at 41 Mount Morris, where Irene now worked as a saleswoman at a retail women's clothing store. Frederick was a locomotive engineer for Conrail. It's not clear when Irene passed away, but based on an obituary posted in 1981 for her husband, she was still alive at the time, and he was survived by not only her and their children, but 5 grandchildren as well. Little is known about Alan's son George, other than he got married in the spring of 1941 to Alice L. Petter. He died in Hertfordshire at the age of 79 in 1990. Alan's daughter Bessie married Frank H. Adams in Essex in October of 1935. On April 11, 1937, Bessie gave birth to a son, Ronald. They lived at 46 Percy Road in Essex, where Bessie worked as a homemaker. Tragically, Bessie's husband Frank died at only 31 in 1940 while on the job. It was said that he was a, quote, lorry driver transporting ammunition to the guns defending London. Bessie passed much later at the age of 85 in February of 1999. Heartbreakingly, I do not believe Alan's son made it past childhood. His records went cold after the 1921 census when he was only 5 years old. So it appears that 2 of their 7 children lived very short lives. I can't imagine the toll that took on Alan and Hannah. For years, Alan remained invisible among the dead, interred in an undistinguishable grave. Who knows how many people passed over his gravesite not knowing that a Titanic survivor, a father, and a serviceman lay beneath their feet. This all changed, however, when in late April 2026, after 105 years in an unmarked grave, Alan Marden Baggott finally received a proper headstone. The ceremony was attended by Mario Cacciatolo, who runs Dark Malta Tours, Titanic enthusiast James Borg, and members of the Friends of Tabraxia Cemetery. Cacciatolo was inspired after visiting the cemetery 2 months prior. He said, quote, "As I stood on the patch of grass where he was buried, I saw how he didn't have a headstone and immediately thought, well, I'll just get him one. I thought it is a poor state of affairs not to have a proper grave, and I knew how easy it is to get a headstone, so why not try?" For Cacciatolo, the decision to get Alan a grave marker was also deeply personal. His father, also a sailor, did not have a headstone when he died. He said in the report, "Given that my dad was also a sailor, there's a bit of symmetry in play. Ultimately, I just believe everyone should be given a dignified place to rest," he said. He didn't have a happy ending in life, but this is a way of acknowledging him, and I feel honored to do so. Before following through with the progress, Cacciatolo contacted Baggott's descendants, who gave their consent to the headstone. James Borg was also moved by Cacciatolo's video on social media about the headstone and contributed to half of the cost after discovering Cacciatolo had already started the process. In a news article, fellow Maltese man James Borg said, "When I found out there was a Titanic survivor who passed away in Malta, I felt compelled to contribute to his memory." Borg also paid tribute to his dear friend and fellow Titanic enthusiast who died in 2025, Neil Powrie, since he didn't get a chance to say goodbye to him upon his passing. This is such a beautiful and extraordinary act of kindness from strangers. It really says something about the community of Titanic and history lovers. What an incredibly kind way to pay tribute to a man who suffered greatly and died a very sad and sudden death. Similar to Annie Robinson, we can only speculate about the factors that led to Alan's drinking. I can't tell if Alan was alive when his son died because I could not find a date on the census, but he most likely was alive when his daughter Nancy passed. His father William passed away in about 1907-1908, and his mother Susan died in 1914. Add on the night of the Titanic sinking. It's a lot of trauma and a lot of loss. It's entirely possible the difficulties of his life contributed to his alcoholism. We'll never know, and like I said in last week's episode, I don't want to claim to know someone's mental state, and I don't want Alan to be remembered for his drinking. I hope he is remembered for his service on the Titanic and other ships. I hope he is remembered for being a father and a husband. As previously mentioned, PTSD wasn't known at the time. You went through something awful and you went back to your life. There was no therapy to help you process the difficult experiences you endured. This was how Alan made his living and how he supported his family, was working on ships. Even after Titanic, it was natural for him to return to his maritime service. Tragically, this very well could have exacerbated his struggles. If this was the case, Alan would have joined a very large statistic. We can't speak for the early 20th century, but a recent study in the United States alone showed that nearly half of those who have PTSD also have problems with drug or alcohol abuse. Consequently, these substances can have the opposite effect and actually worsen PTSD symptoms. So, for example, some people will use alcohol to help them sleep, when in reality, the alcohol will cause the person to have less restful sleep, making their symptoms even harder to deal with. Alan worked hard his whole life, and in the end, he suffered alone. He deserves a better legacy. I'm really grateful that his story has had a positive update. Thank you to Mario and James for gifting this man a gravestone so that others may pay tribute to him and give their respects. Let's remember him for his contributions, for his time dedicated to serving others. He has grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Hopefully his stories and his memory will live on through them and further generations. I really do hope he is at peace now. Let's pause and pay our respects to Alan Marden Baggott for his contributions to the passengers on the night of April 14th, 1912. Let's also have a moment of silence for his death and all those who have been lost to substances and those who suffered in silence after traumatic experiences. Thank you, crew, for joining me in today's episode. As we disembark, I wish you happiness, love, and peace. Take care, and I'll see you next time on the Voices of Titanic.